Present me the lady who decided, being perfectly educated, to have 7, 8, or 9 children. In these words of the French President Macron, it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Catherine Ruth Pakaluk, Associate Professor of Social Research and Economic Thought here at the Catholic University of America, Busch School of Business, and the mother of 8 children, and even, if you can believe it, a grandmother. So this is a bit of a playful introduction. Some of you may know that in response to Macron's rather ham-handed comments about educated women and childbearing, that Professor Pakaluk started a viral internet sensation known as postcards for Macron. Social media was flooded overnight with postcards of women, often depicted in their doctoral robes or other evidence of academic achievement, surrounded by their many children. Professor Pakaluk's own academic achievements are significant. She holds a doctorate in economics from Harvard University. She is a 2023 recipient of the Freedom and Opportunity Prize from the Heritage Foundation and the 2015 Novak Award winner from the Acton Institute. She has put her tremendous intellectual gifts and social science perspective in service to understanding such varied and vital matters as gender, the vocation of women, education, and the family. Her new book, conveniently displayed right here for you, available on Amazon, should you wish to look it up. The acclaimed ethnography, Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Define the Birth Dearth, was launched just a few weeks ago. It is a multidisciplinary account of American women choosing to have large families against the global trend to sub-replacement fertility. As she puts it, in a 2-child world, an 8-child choice begs for an explanation. And in this book, she sets out to give it to us. Hannah's Children was in part, I think, motivated by the postcards for Macron movement. But I also think it was motivated by her inquisitive wonder. In tackling a thorny problem in contemporary family policy, the birth dearth, instead of asking why aren't women having children, she instead asks why do some women choose to have large families. Her style of inquiry is, I think, to get at what Gerard Manley Hopkins called the dearest freshness deep down things. And as she explains in her book, nothing more deeply informs the way we order our lives together than the first society we experience, the family. Wonder, John Sr. told us, leads to wisdom. And Professor Pakaluk has a unique capacity to explain the wisdom gleaned through her wonder to others. So I could think of no better speaker to address us today on the freedom of the family. Before I turn the mic over to her, I would be remiss if I didn't also mention, as many of you probably know, how deeply grateful I am to call Catherine among my closest of friends. She and her husband, Michael, here are the godparents of our youngest child. No small feat to pray for that little guy. She is my faithful walking partner, though she is more faithful than I will say. My reliable intercessor in prayer, the woman who taught my husband to bake bread, right? These are all very important things. But happily, she is also my colleague here at the Catholic University. So please join me in welcoming Professor Pakaluk.
Lest I knock it over. Point. Goodness. Thank you for that generous introduction. My remarks are upside down. I was going to say I'm used to being introduced generally by students at student events all over the place. And I've learned that with students, you should get out ahead of the introduction problem and send them a couple of sentences about how, I'm a wife and a mother, and that's the way I like to be introduced. But when your friend and colleague is going to introduce you, you think, well, you'd better just wait and see what happens. So that was certainly generous and a great testimony to the friendships that we have here, the friendship we have here. It's also just a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. And most especially in the presence of so many, not just friends and colleagues, but former teachers and people that I've really learned most of what I'd like to say tonight from. So this is really quite a special time. So thank you for that. In some sense, these remarks are out of order. So what I'm going to do is, and I'm looking around for Professor Bradley. There he is. In some sense, you should have come after me, right? Because what I'm going to say is so closely aligned with what you're going to say. But in a sense, I think this is in some sense Aboriginal, what I'm going to say first. So, but I hope that you'll understand these two sets of remarks as being as closely aligned as I think that they are. And if I were now, which I shouldn't do, I'm introducing my own talk. If I were to introduce my own talk, I would say that I'm interested in something that I think I find very compelling in Professor Bradley's remarks, which is how we've gotten so unclear about what religion is, and that the unclarity about what religion is exactly what's preventing us from depending on the remedy that religion is supposed to be. And I think ultimately I will say the same thing about the family. We've gotten so unclear about what the family is that we certainly don't know how to solve the problems that we're facing. So I could think of no better way to begin this short reflection by quoting Pope Leo. So at St. Peter's in Rome in 1900, November of 1900, on the first day, the 23rd year of that pontificate, which was a great and long pontificate, not unlike John Paul II's pontificate, the vicar Peter delivered an urgent plea, which perhaps you have read. How is it, the Pope asked, that in spite of all the zeal for the welfare of the masses, nations are in such straits and even distress that the evil is daily on the increase? This is in 1900. So we too might wonder. And he continued, we are told that society is quite able to help itself, that it can flourish without the assistance of Christianity and attain its own end by unaided efforts. What blindness, he said. Once the idea of the authority of God as the judge of right and wrong is forgotten, law must necessarily lose its primary authority and justice must perish, and these are the two most powerful and most necessary bonds of society. Similarly, he said, once the hope and expectation of eternal happiness is taken away, to Jerry's point, temporal goods will be greedily sought after. Every man will strive to secure the largest share for himself. Hence will arise envy, jealousy, hatred, and the consequences are conspiracy, anarchy, nihilism, neither peace abroad nor security at home. Public life will be stained with crime. We must either anticipate, he said, ultimate ruin or seek for an efficient remedy. It's right and necessary, he said, to punish malefactors, to educate the masses, and by legislation to prevent crime in every possible way. But all this is by no means sufficient. A power greater than human must be called in to teach men's hearts, awaken in them a sense of duty, and make them better. This is the power which once before saved the world from destruction when groaning under much more terrible evils. Once remove all impediments, he wrote, and allow the Christian spirit to revive and grow strong in a nation, and that nation will be healed. Everyone must see that the very growth of civilization, which is so ardently desired, depends greatly upon this, since it is fed and grows not so much by material wealth and prosperity as by the spiritual qualities of morality and virtue. And Pope Leo concluded in an often cited passage, you must look upon it as your chief part of your duty to engrave upon the minds of your people the true knowledge, the very likeness of Jesus Christ, and to illustrate his charity, his mercies, his teaching, by your writing and your words. In schools and universities, from the pulpit, wherever opportunity is offered to you. The world has heard enough of the so-called rights of man. Let it hear something of the rights of God. So the subject of my remarks today, the freedom of the family, has its source precisely here in the rights of God. For if men and women and families have freedoms, they are to be found and established in the rights of God. That is, what is due to him. The dues, or the duties, give rise to freedom's claims and make them authoritative. Obedience to the truth about God and man, John Paul II reminded us, is the first condition of freedom. But what are the duties of the family that constitute its freedom? So to answer this, we must look to the nature of marriage. Marriage is the beginning and the foundation of the family, said Pope Leo. What is due to God of the family is found in the end and purpose of marriage. So Pope Leo wrote in Arcanum, first, there has been vouchsafed to the marriage union a higher and nobler purpose than was ever before given to it. By the command of Christ, it looks not only to the propagation of the human race, but to the bringing forth of children for the church, fellow citizens with the saints and the domestics of God, so that a people might be born and brought up for worship and religion of the true God and the Savior, Jesus Christ. So we have in that formulation the familiar procreation and education of children, but not simply, children not simply, but immortal beings destined for heavenly citizenship. So marriage, the beginning and foundation of the family, is for the generation of children and their Christian education. To this, Pope Leo adds, of course, mutual help, including fidelity and unity, one man, one woman, sexual exclusivity, perpetuity, permanence, and aid in the fulfillment of the duties of state. These latter are traditionally rendered as the secondary end because they are derived from the primary end. The secondary ends safeguard the primary end. The family founded in marriage owes then to God unalterably these duties, the generation of offspring, at least we would say the willing acceptance of offspring, and the careful Christian education of those children in the faith, as the church understands education, fully religious in character. The family also owes to God fidelity, permanence, and fitting mutual support. The Catholic rite of marriage affirms this. Two questions precede the exchange of consent, always. Are you prepared to love and honor each other as long as you both shall live? Are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and to bring them up according to the law of Christ? So these are the duties of marriage. But for our purposes today, these are the bases for making any kind of sound claims about the freedom of the family. So I'd like to start with a simple preliminary then. Since the family must do its duty, these are the rights of God, and no other entity can do its duty, the family must be free to do it. So this is the whole matter at hand. The family has a function, we sometimes say, but even function misses the character, I think. It's better to say that the family has an office, akin to a kind of energy or power. The family is the life-giving and educating communion of persons, ordained or ordered, such that a people might be born and brought up for worship and religion of the true God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. So this divinely appointed energy of the family is to generate and educate under conditions of unity and permanence. A Christian marriage turns this energy on, as an electrician might complete a circuit. And so a social electricity flows into society through husband and wife, a kind of dyadic conduit. It follows then that the freedom of the family, as we think about it, which is, of course, a positive freedom in substance, that is a freedom for the outflow of its energy. It cashes out as a negative freedom in society. The family must be free from interference with its office, because it is the responsibility of the family to do its office or contribute its energy, its work. So it must not be hindered, that is, prevented by some sabotage of the circuits. Its natural power will flow if unobstructed. Others, be they friends, neighbors, countrymen, civil authorities, must not prevent the power or the energy or the force of the family. The batter is up. The pitch has been thrown and the batter is poised. He must swing. We have not yet considered the source of his energy, But we understand that the source of the movement must be something prior to and other than those enjoined not to interfere. A spring bubbling up from the ground can be blocked, covered, hidden, choked off, but its vitality, the vitality of a spring, cannot be summoned by positive law any more than the Egyptians could make bricks without straw. The freedom of the bubbling spring or the poised batter to complete its motion is assured primarily by restraints on external forces. It must not be hindered. Other forces must stand down. Consider a young man who takes a bride, establishes a modest dwelling. God willing, a child will come and more children will come. The man will work, make a living, procure necessities of life. His bride will bear children and nourish them. Together they will rear them to know and love God. They will worship God and educate their children with the help of the church. These things will happen. They are events. They're forces of nature and of nature's God. The man and his wife's vitality to do a thing enjoins others not to stop them. Discerned in this way, we do see the difficulty of simplistic appeals to the distinction between positive and negative freedoms. The existence of positive freedoms for persons and groups of persons, duties to do a thing, necessarily place restraints on others who may hinder them from doing a thing. These restraints are in fact duties for others not to do a thing, duties to stand down, or negative freedoms in civil society for the persons who possess a duty to do a thing. Thou shalt not kill can be rendered, thou shalt not hinder another from continuing to render his life to God alone. So to be pro-life is obviously not to command others to live, as if that could be done, but to stand for others not to be deprived of a life force or a life that they owe to God alone, and to give witness to the source and author of life. This is so because to be a living human being is to be in possession of a life force or an active principle which has God for its source and God for its end. The life force in a person will continue unless hindered until the natural divinely appointed time. Others are enjoined not to hinder this motion, this force. The positive duty to direct one's life to God imposes a restraint on others, expressed in civil society as a negative freedom belonging to the duty holder not to be interfered with in relation to his life force. Likewise, to be a family is to be in possession of a force, an active principle which has God for its source and its end, a force that gives life to the body through conception and nourishing, and life to the soul through baptism and Christian education. Others are enjoined not to hinder this motion. The positive freedom or duty to render one's marriage duties to God imposes a restraint on others, expressed in civil society as a negative freedom for the duty holder. The duty holder in this case is the family, the married couple, not to be interfered with in relation to its life force. So to be pro-family is not to command or incentivize others to form families, as if that could be done, but to stand for the right of families not to be deprived of a life force they owe to God alone, and to give witness to the source and author of that life force, in this case, the church. The clear and continual teaching of the Catholic tradition is that the family and the church are twin life forces in society, as it were, powers, yes, powers, but not in the sense of dominion as much as of energy. The rights of God, as Pope Leo explained, demand that they should labor together. So this work or energy of the church and the family labor together in rendering what is due to God. Neither the church nor the family can do without the other. But they also are treated analogously vis-a-vis society. Indeed, we say the family is the domestic church. Together, the family and the church as a lifeblood or a vital force or an energy feed and nourish society. Together, the family and the church as a lifeblood, the very growth of civilization, Pope Leo said in 1900, depend greatly upon this Christian spirit, since it's fed and grows not so much by wealth and prosperity as by spiritual qualities. The language of the Pope is not accidental here. Moral obligations, the rights of God, they do the feeding and the nourishing. So this is about the source of the spring. So Pope Leo continued, a power greater than human must be called in to teach men's hearts and awaken in them a sense of duty and make them better. This is the power, he continued, which once before saved the world from destruction. Remove all impediments. So notice the language of removing impediments. Remove impediments and allow the Christian spirit to revive and grow strong in a nation, and that nation will be healed. The twin powers of the church and the family are duty holders with positive freedoms subsisting in civil society as negative ones or restraints on others. Remove impediments, says the Pope. Let her power revive and grow strong. Let it be the efficient remedy. Okay, so the coincidence of this positive freedom of the duty holder and negative freedoms, I would like to say, finds its most elegant expression in that so-called subsidiary principle called by Pope Pius XI and almost, I think, universally corrupted in today's expositions. So Pope Pius wrote in 1931, just as it is gravely wrong to take from individuals what they can accomplish by their own initiative and industry and give it to the community, so also is it an injustice and at the same time a grave evil and a disturbance of right order to assign to a greater and higher association what lesser and subordinate organizations can do. So for every social activity ought of its very nature furnish help to the members of the body social and never destroy and absorb them. So 3 things to note about this. First, it's as the Pope explains it, what's wrong there is to take something from individuals. And the grave evil is to assign to a higher group what a subordinate group can do by its own energy. So it's energy, initiative, and industry, so language of energy. The principle enjoins higher associations to stand down, that is, not to do a thing, not to take, not to reassign. So it's a thou shalt not. Second, not take what or reassign what? The power, the thing the primary association can accomplish by its own energy. And this energy is a description of its dues. It's what it owes. It can't take away what it owes. Do not deprive subordinate groups of their energy, their work, or their motion, their life force. Third, the Pope says, what will come of such a grave wrong? What warning does he give? The consequences are twofold. The lower association, in this case we're thinking about the family, the lower association will not be helped, but in fact destroyed by absorption. Second, the higher association too will harm itself, crushed by infinite tasks and duties, he says. So if you take the proper duties of this particular husband and wife, and you reassign them to this neighborhood or to this village or to this state, you may in fact destroy this husband and wife by absorption and crush the village while you're at it. A possibility that a kind of help could be a wolf in shepherd's clothing, maybe a cunning, paternalistic wolf. What does it mean, after all, to say that the family is a basic cell of society? Has it got any meaning besides the sorry ring of cliche? From the subsidiary principle, a rather shocking meaning seems to arise. No tasks of higher associations, neighborhood or village or city, can rightly belong to these orders which were not first an activity of the family, and for which the family required collaboration from other families. Keeping watch over the wagon train at night, for instance, families energetically join together, form an alliance, and take turns so that all families can take a turn at sleeping. Their protective alliance is an extension of the protection that one father naturally undertakes in undertaking his duty to both generate and educate his children. The domestic household, Pope Leo wrote, is antecedent, as well in idea as in fact, to the gathering of men into a community. The family must necessarily then have rights and duties, which are prior to those of the community and founded more immediately in nature. If the citizens, Pope Leo wrote, if the families on entering into association and fellowship were to experience hindrance in a commonwealth instead of help, and were to find their rights, their capacity to do their duties attacked instead of being upheld, society would rightly be an object of detestation rather than of desire. And so you see this language again and again and again in the popes, the Leonine popes, all the way through, are going to use this language. Society must not be a hindrance to the duties. The duties tell us what makes sense for society to be up to. If society is a hindrance, it would be an object of detestation. So the family Pope Leo says is antecedent. He also uses this language, the family, the society of a man's house. A society very small, one must admit, he says, but nonetheless a true society and older than any state. This incomplete society, which is the family, finds its completion in a larger society insofar as collaboration and help to do its duty can be found there. Commerce, protection, culture, sports, recreation, and so forth. So a healthy pro-family social order is one in which families are not hindered from rendering their life force, whether alone or in collaboration with other families. Those in power, Pope Pius reminded us, should be sure that the more perfectly a graduated order is kept among various associations, the family being the first. In observance of this principle of subsidiary function, he said, the stronger social authority and effectiveness will be, and happiness and prosperity for the state. Thus, subsidiarity cannot be defined positively, as it often is corrupted, as, say, a preference for things to be done at the lowest level. It's corrupted. Because without starting at the actual primary level, the family, we don't even know what functions or energies are to be done. Coming up with the tasks for which the family needs help is the office of the family. It's the positive freedom of the family. It's the duty due to God of the duty holder. The family has an office to perform and a force to direct. One may not proceed as a social planner might, asking what task ought to be done for the common welfare with so many levies in our possession. Rather, whatever a family would not do must be removed from consideration. Multi-generational debt, redistributive programs, social investments with no claimant, and so forth, because the family must do, society must not do. Paternalism is not wrong because it violates individual freedoms. The libertarian kind of complaint is wrong because it's a direct attack on the responsibility of the pater, the society of the man and the wife and his children. It represents a grave and disordered absorption of the father by the state. So subsidiarity, rightly understood, recognizes the family at the center of the social order as its, if you will, meter and form. Families are the beat or the measure, or I've discovered this wonderful phrase in Hannah Arendt, the pulse. Actually, she said tact, the tact of natality. There's no society per se, right? There's no mass of individuals. There are only compositions of families. So families then as such are the form of natural liberty, the highest endowment of the rational creature. Natural liberty is the vessel or the wrapping or the vehicle for the creature to reach her creator in love, to freely make herself a captive, right? But this is the job of the soul, it's the duty of the soul, but it's also stamped, as it were, into our flesh through our families, this metaphysical truth about God. As the babe reaches to her mother and finds her craving rewarded, so we learn who we are and who God is. Our freedom is for the captivity of union, but a freely willed captivity. Subsidiarity then unites the positive and negative expressions of freedom in a single locus, the energy of the family, as gravity and lift together keep a plane aloft in any moment. But then, sensing that subsidiarity is a principle of non-interference, it's a principle of non-interference for families and groups of families, are we forced then to align with seemingly defective ideals of liberty as non-interference? So not so. Subsidiarity rightly understood demonstrates the insufficiency of a harm principle as a defense of negative liberty. Mill's only justification for interference is to prevent harm is just as vacuous as things should be done at the lowest level. The family claims freedom from interference in its affairs, not because interference is wrong intrinsically, but because interference and non-interference alike are ordered to this life force of the lower group, the preservation of the sphere in which the duties of the duty holder are fulfilled. Restraint or claims on others not to be coerced arise directly from that positive freedom, the moral obligation to do a thing owed to God. Okay, it's all preliminary. In the business of diagnosing what's wrong with America, I would like to say, and I'm thinking about Pope Leo diagnosing what was wrong 100 years ago, it's easy to name the symptoms, and many of the symptoms that he raised: isolation and loneliness, polarization, depression, anxiety, individualism, crime, violence. And now we can add, thanks to Abigail Schreier, the kids aren't growing up. Critics interrogate the American founding: race, creed, class, wokeism, and now bad therapy. But if the family is the basic cell, we might look there first, unless we should find, in fact, that the family is doing all right. There is no proper function at the higher level of society, which was not first a proper function of the family. If this is true, we may also correctly say there is no remedy to be found at the higher level for a disorder coming from the lower level. Soberly, we will be required by the subsidiary principle to consider the health of the family and its in relation to its freedom rightly understood as the responsibility to provide energy and life force as a duty holder. There's a kind of help, Pope Pius XI told us, which may have been a wolf in shepherd's clothing. I've likened the life force of the family in society to an energy or a motion, a movement. It is that, but I'm going to have to return now to using the language of office, a power divinely ordained. Because an exercise of the office is a human act, and we must look for the ways in which it can fail to be what it is to make a final determination about the freedom of the family. If the family is failing to be what it is, and we know that it is failing, we could not but look to the disposition of its responsibilities. So it'd be useful, I think, to think about some other divinely appointed office, something very unlike the family, to see it for what it is. So consider, say, a dauphin or a king in some foreign land. There are at least 4 normal ways, there could be others, 4 normal ways for such a personage to fail at being what he is: assassination, usurpation, plunder, and abdication. Assassination, of course, is some kind of fatal attack leading to the death of the personage. The others fall short of fatal, but their effects may be just as devastating to a kingdom dependent upon the health of the true king. A usurpation occurs when someone who does not hold the office takes or abrogates the defining duties, directly or indirectly, forcibly or through cunning. Plunder occurs when someone who does not hold the office steals the assets of the personage directly required for doing the duty. Finally, abdication occurs when the duty holder willingly gives up responsibilities, maybe trades the duties of the duty holder for some other easier life. Since, as we've seen, freedom of an office holder must be understood as an obligation to fulfill a duty, freedom is undermined by any departure from duty done by the duty holder. The freedom of the family of positive substance and negative civil expression must be assessed by a single standard. How is it going for the family doing its duty? I could recite the social statistics, but you know them. 40%, now more, of births are outside of marriage. Fewer adults are married. Rising ages at first marriage. Rapidly plunging birth rates around the world. Roughly 90% in our country of school children deprived of a Christian education. Rapidly rising secularization, which we have to attribute in part to the family not doing its duty. The life-giving communion of persons ordered to the Christian education of new persons doesn't appear to be showing up, either to generate or to educate. In a sea of worrying social statistics, it's hard to find any faring so ill in a vast proportion of society as the birth rate and as the outcome of education, Christian or otherwise. The state of our family unions is apparently not very free. But is it usurpation, plunder, or abdication. To be sure, we could find all three, and in some places, I'm sure, a touch of assassination too. A paternalistic education movement launched by relentless 19th century progressives remains largely unquestioned by pro-family conservatives today. This is usurpation at its finest. An equally paternalistic system of social payments to replace the old age support traditionally provided by children. Usurpation again. State control of commerce and effective seizure of material assets through centralized banking and fiat currencies. Plunder. Crowding out of the church via state-sponsored charity, usurpation of the church's office, and also plunder of families, because it's the theft of the spiritual assets of the family. But of the three, abdication, if we find it, surely deserves the first rank among the culprits. American families, I'm sad to report, Catholics as well as Protestants, needed very little encouragement, if any, to trade in their baby carriages for Enovid. The birth control pill diffused so rapidly through American society that its broad normalization was already completely accomplished when Humanae Vitae was finally published and opposed from the heart of this campus. One could hardly make a bogeyman on that score of any usurper or plunderer. The American family abdicated its duty to accept children lovingly from God, quite willingly, it would seem. But the trouble probably didn't start with the pill. One astute observer alleged in 1928, this is a priest by the name of Father James Gillis, an American priest, who published a short book in 1928, The Catholic Church in the Home. And if I do nothing else today but recommend this book to you, I will be happy. So Father Gillis wrote in 1928, this is the opening line of this tract. There exists today, he said, in all civilized countries, a considerable movement for the abolition of marriage and the disintegration of the family. Comfortable conservative folk, he said, may find such a statement incredible. They may admit, indeed, that the dignity or the sanctity of marriage, is endangered, but not marriage itself. Now, were it not for the considerable measure of prophecy contained in this book, it would hardly be worth citing today. No one remembers who Father James Gillis was. But Gillis, in this short tract, he takes on the likes of H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, university elites at Chicago, Wisconsin, Harvard, and Columbia, the Saint-Simonians and the Marxian socialists, and vast numbers of writers of popular magazines and books. Altogether, he provides a devastating review of what he called the prevailing moral chaos. Surveying the condition of the family in America, Father Gillis railed at intellectual radicals, university professors. He called them usurpers, largely destructive rather than constructive. He quipped, H.G. Wells is fond of the phrase education or catastrophe. It seems not to occur to him that education as conducted nowadays may be catastrophe. But above all, Father Gillis blamed abdication. So he lots of passages for the usurpers, but he blamed abdication ultimately. And he wrote, quoting Cardinal Newman, he wrote, if the family is to develop, he's mocking the people who say that marriage has evolved. He says if it's to develop further in its evolution, it must, as Cardinal Newman says, apropos of the development of doctrine, preserve its type. Unless the evolution of marriage, he says, follows that rule, marriage will no longer be marriage, but something else. Well, what is its type? What is it supposed to do? Well, it's the educating life force. So Father Gillis continued, and his rant now is worth quoting in full, so bear with me, it must be quoted in full. Father Gillis says, so in response to what is its type, he says, the raison d'etre of the family is the training intellectual, moral, and religious of the children. That obligation rests first and last upon the parents. If it must not be alienated, he says, even under the pretext of delegation. Interesting. Doubtless, parents may make use of deputies in the training of their children, but the responsibility rests always with the father and the mother. The increasing tendency, remember this is 1928, the increasing tendency to delegate and subdelegate parental duty bodes ill for the welfare of the family. In the United States, the public schools, and to an almost equal extent, the parochial schools, are bearing more and more of the burden that belongs naturally to parents. And he continued, the children receive from the city or from the parish free books, free stationery, free lunch, free transportation. At school, they are put under the care of doctors and dentists, of nurses and welfare workers. Their play is supervised by paid instructors. Even after school, they may go to the YMCA and the YWCA for junior classes in swimming and other sports. There are associations of Boy Scouts and campfire girls and a score of other allurements, devised with the best of intentions by civic officials and private philanthropists to keep children almost constantly away from home, and accustom parents to bring up their family vicariously. So with deliberate fault on no one's part, the home as a social, educational, and religious center becomes rapidly less important. Even at church, parents and children are separated. He says there are Sunday schools and children's masses from which parents are excluded. Societies and sodalities separate boys from girls and boys and girls from their parents, even at the altar rail. Doubtless, there are reasons of convenience, if not of necessity, for all this, but if the present trend goes to its logical conclusion, we will come dangerously near to the ancient Spartan or the modern Russian idea, according to which children are the property of the state, and the state may do what it wills with them, and parents have nothing to do but acquiesce and surrender their natural rights. It requires, he said, no deep study of philosophy or history to see that this modern tendency, however innocently originated, is vicious. It is a threat not only to the family, but to the state. So you hear that again. That's very Leonine, what he's saying. Of course, he would have been well-studied in Leonine teaching. A wolf in shepherd's clothing, indeed. When is a help, and when is it a wolf? It seems to be a wolf, a harm to the energy of the lower level when it takes from the family or seduces the family into giving up willingly that which it can accomplish by its own initiative and industry. And beware the social planner who alleges he only takes from those whose initiative and industry doesn't meet a desirable social standard. It's hard to imagine today anyone curmudgeonly enough to complain about free lunches and discounted textbooks. But Father Gillis believed it was a hop, skip, and a jump from free lunch to the, in his words, ignoble conclusion that, in his words, marriage and childbearing are an economic convenience and not a sacrament. He excoriates the blind, his words, blind, H.G. Wells, for the view that, quote, a woman with healthy and successful children, in Wells's vision of the world, will draw a wage for each of them from the state. It will be her wage, Wells says. And Gillis goes on to blast, likewise, George Bernard Shaw for desiring that, quote, every woman bearing and rearing a valuable child will receive a handsome series of payments, thereby making motherhood a real profession as it ought to be, and suggesting that we place the work of a wife and mother on the same footing as other work, that is, on the footing of labor worthy of its hire, and provide for employment in motherhood, exactly as for employment in shipbuilding or any other recognized breadwinning trade. He concluded, the tendency to to surrender parental authority to the state, or to the church even, or to any other institution outside the home, is a retrograde movement against the normal progress of civilization. The views of the socialists Wells and Shaw, denounced by Gillis in 1928 as retrograde, I would like to suggest to you, are now the mainstream views of leading pro-family religious conservatives. Either Gillis was right 100 years ago, or today's pro-family conservatives are right, but they are not both right. Either the family has not been helped enough or it has been helped to its own destruction, and it is up to us now to make a determination. How's it going for the family doing its duty? Father Gillis warned towards the end, society is in danger from the breakdown of domestic morality. We are face to face, he urged 100 years ago, with the crucial problem of how to safeguard marriage. The family must be perpetuated or civilization is doomed. I do not think you will fault me if I say that the danger of which he spoke has come to pass. We do inhabit now a non-civilization, which, taking seriously that boys may be girls, that wombs may be rented, that the marital energy may be turned off and turned on at will. Gillis and Pope Leo before him spoke univocally. Gillis concluded his tract in the following way: there is no hope for an improvement in the condition of marriage, the family, and the home, except in a return to the conviction that marriage is a sacrament. It is futile, he said, to tinker with divorce laws. Futile to appeal to patriotism as an argument against falling birth rates. Futile to attempt the rehabilitation of family life by a mere plea for the welfare of society. Unless God build the house, they that labor in vain that build it. The reason for Gillis's lack of enthusiasm for tinkering with divorce laws is simply this: if the spring stops bubbling, it cannot be commanded. Its energy is prior, is antecedent in idea and in fact to those who would have plundered its bounty or dammed it up. So when we debate today whether culture or politics takes priority, that doesn't get the problem right. It's not how the church sees the question. Sure, politics is downstream from culture, and yes, law shapes culture, but what Gillis meant and what Pope Leo meant is what John Paul II said in Poland, that the exclusion of Jesus Christ is an act against man. That's not culture or politics, that's the Savior. Jesus Christ and his church are the efficient remedy, the power greater than human. The source of the life force is, in fact, a specific belief, the creed, and a specific act of belonging, baptism. That isn't culture or law, it's a Savior, and it matters less whether we are a republic or a monarchy than whether we are a Christian people. As we have a republic, if we can keep it, we'll only keep it if we're Christian. Pope Leo lamented, and as I quoted at the beginning, we are told that society is quite able to help itself, that it can flourish without the assistance of Christianity and attain its end by its own unaided efforts. What blindness! A power greater than human must be called in to teach men's hearts, awaken in them a sense of duty. The source of duty-doing for those with rights, the duty holders, is that power greater than human. The family is a wellspring, an energy, a life force, but it can no more be commanded by others than it can command itself. Our trouble is not that the family in America is too free, is she's not free enough. She's not mistress of her castle because she's abdicated her throne, preferring neither children nor the training of them. So as the memes say, which way will it be, Western man? The way of the modern, comfortable conservatives? Our modern Welleses and our Shaws? With their, forgive me, demented policy bootstrapping fueled by monetary and fiscal alchemy? Or the way of Pope Leo and Father Gillis and Cardinal Wojtyła, faith, fecundity, and a sober return of familial responsibilities to the hearth and to the home, fueled by the spark of divine grace. Of only one of these options are we assured, in fact, that my burden is easy and my yoke is light. Good fortune for us, then, that such a choice is probably the only one with any chance of success. Thank you.